Thank you, Dr. Hu. Betty will
let me
make
introduce.
an introduction.
Let me introduce our speaker today. 那今天呢，我们的讲题呢非常的特别，是更好的家庭沟通。那我们 Doctor 呢也特别从医院赶过来，我想在这儿呢简单的介绍一下我们 Doctor Rona Hu。Dr. Rona Hu 呢，他是临床教授，精神病学和行为科学，斯坦福医院和诊所的教授。那 Dr. Rona Hu 呢，他是斯坦福医院急性精神科的住院部的医疗主任，专门为患有严重精神疾病的人呢提供护理，包括精神分裂症、双相情感障碍和抑郁症。他在加州大学旧金山分校呢完成了医学院和精神病学住院医师的培训，而且也通过了美国国立卫生研究院获得的药理学和精神分裂症研究的奖学金。我们 Dr. Hu 呢，他还积极的参与了少数民族问题和文化精神的病学，并因为他的临床护理呢、研究呢和教学呢而获得了大家包括地区跟国家的认可。今天呢，我们讲的呢就是如何能有更好的家庭沟通。这个里头呢，包括了减少了我们大家共同可以减少了共同的痛苦，而增加了共同的快乐。那么为什么我们的家人不分享我们大家的感受呢？我想今天呢，我们要大家呢以最热的掌声来欢迎我们 Dr. Rona Hu 为我们来讲 Better Communication in the Family。掌声欢迎 Dr. Rona Hu。
谢谢。所以对不起，我会讲英文，可是假设有问题，那有人可以也帮我讲中文，因为我在美国生长的，所以我也不会，我不会看字，我是文盲，我妈妈说我是文盲，所以我会先我多半都会讲英文，可是假设Betty， 假设你可以也帮我，有的时候会讲中文也可以。好，所以今天我们在讲 family communication, and I'll put some of the terms into the chat. I don't have PowerPoint slides. I'll be talking directly, and we're going to talk about some of the concepts that help with family communication, and then some of the strategies. And then one of the things that I want to make sure to talk about is also repair when something goes wrong. I already have some questions, and so we can actually use some of the questions to help structure our conversation. And then Betty, remind me what time we're ending so that I can budget my time.
Sure.
What time do we end?
I think you can finish your talk around 8:10, and then we have 20 minutes left for the question and answers.
Excellent. Okay, that sounds
thank
good.
You. Yeah,
so I'm writing a little note to myself, and then I'll keep track of the time. Okay, so actually, before I talk about the different concepts, I already have a question, and I like it very much. So I want to come back to this question. So thank you, whoever sent the question. It says, if spouse talking or email very mean to you, how do you handle it? How to stop it? If you're speaking mean also, it will go into a fight for sure. It's just not worth to spend time in fighting. Please help. So that's I think a very important thing. We want to improve communication. We always want to improve communication in the family, but during the pandemic, this has been especially difficult. It's difficult for each of us individually because our usual ways of coping, our strategies, things that we used to be able to do easily, going to work, going out, sports, music, movies, those all became very complicated. If we have family members that are in school, for a while they couldn't go to school or they did everything online. So each individual is stressed, right? And then when we're all stuck together in the family, then it becomes very stressful. So I know that in my own family, things that didn't used to bothered me much more during this pandemic. So as much as we can communicate better. So one concept, and I can type it into the chat, is what's called fixed versus growth mindset. And this was by someone at Stanford named Carol Dweck. Let me see if I spell her name right. And what do I mean by this? Fixed mindset is if you have a label and then you stay that way. So I'm going to use my own family sometimes as an example. If my mom says, you're a good daughter, you're a bad daughter. You're a good son, you're a bad son. Fixed mindset is also, I think, how I grew up in medical school, where they say, this is a good medical student, this is a strong medical student, this is someone smart. And it's very natural to think about fixed mindset, you know, this is a good person, this is a bad person. This is a good dog, this is a bad dog. But there's some problems with the fixed mindset. And one is that if something is not quite right, then you don't want anyone to know. If you're, so for fixed mindset, if a medical student doesn't know something, they don't ask the question, because then I might find out they didn't know it. So now they're not a smart medical student, they're a bad medical student. And then they try to hide that. Whereas it's much more useful if the medical student says, hey, I've never done this procedure before. Can you teach me how to do it? And that's what I mean by growth. So as we talk about family members, I think one of the things that that comes up is if so with children, and this isn't exclusively Chinese. My husband is not Chinese, and his family his mother gave them nicknames. The things about that is that, let's say I don't have a sister, but let's say I'm the smart one and she's the pretty one. Do we both feel good about ourselves? No. I feel like I'm not pretty and she feels like she's not smart. It also means that if she does something smart, then she still doesn't get to be the smart one. I think that this is something that comes up in a lot of family roles where people, you know, I'm the oldest one, I'm the youngest one, I'm the best at this, and it's very common. If it's something that you have been doing in your family, it's not because you're a bad person, it's because it sometimes saves time. And especially if you were brought up that way, you know, my brother has twins, and he calls one of them Lao Da. And it's sort of like, wait, they were born at the same time. But to the one that he thinks is older, he ascribes more maturity. He gives her that role. And it's kind of unfair. It puts pressure on the one who's supposed to be more mature, so she can't admit to something that she needs to know differently, needs to do differently. And then it also makes the one that he says is younger always be a little bit inferior. So one of the first concepts that I want to get across is this idea that we are all capable of growth, and that today I hope I'm a smart person, but there's going to be things I don't know, and that I'm going to learn from this. What this also means in terms of growth is that many things are opportunities. Mistakes are, have you heard there's some of the high-tech companies that say mistakes are data? So if you make a mistake, you can actually learn from it. And as we talk about when we're working with, well, it could be with employees. For me, it's often with medical students. For families, it's your spouse or your children. If you praise effort and also the effect that it has, that will probably get better results than if you praise something that's fixed. So if I say to my child, oh, you're so smart, it's hard to know what to do with that. you feel good, but then am I smart because I got a good grade? Am I smart because I know something? She might not want to tell me if she's struggling in a class. On the other hand, if I say, oh, you studied so hard for this test, and so that's the effort, and then look at the effect. This is especially helpful in relationships. So if I say, I'm so glad that you told me about what happened. Now we can work on it together. So I'm praising the effort. And then if it has an effect, when one of my patients said, you know, after we had been talking about this growth mindset, oh, Dr. Hu, you taught us about something that we didn't know before, and now my brother is smiling. So that I felt better, because it's sort of like, oh, okay, these were some things they didn't know before. So I felt better. I'm going to do something like that again with them. And then also they told me the effect. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about praise. Praise is a little bit easier. Another concept that I want to mention is that emotions are complex. So I'll just type these as we go. That makes it a little bit easier. And so you can have more than one emotion at a time. So if my, I say, maybe I tell my mother, oh, when you criticized my husband, he felt bad. And then my mother is like, oh, then I'm a monster. You must hate me. It's like, no. It's like, we love you, we appreciate you, but I think my husband would like it better if you, said it a different way, so that we can have more than one emotion at a time. And we'll come back to this concept in a little bit. And I noticed that there's some questions or comments in the chat. So if someone wants to, I can't read Chinese, 对不起. So if someone would like to translate those for me, I can help. There's a question now: if you can't gain spiritual support from your family members whenever you need, and your family members also complain that they can't gain support from you either, what should you do? That's a great question. How are we able to help support each other? And I see a hand raised. Han? Sorry, there's someone whose hand is raised.
Well, we will have a Q&A session later on after your talk. So maybe right now you just take the questions from the chat. Okay. And those comments on in Chinese, they said some of them don't understand English, but we'll try to find a way. But please continue. Yeah.
Would it be helpful for me to talk and then someone help translate?
I'm not sure if it will slow you down or.
If you can, that would be wonderful.
I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing that.
Do you want to try?
Yeah, but I'll
just
try.
Summary. Yeah, just summary. Yeah.
So far, the talking about that all of us are capable of growth, and that we are not a good daughter, bad daughter, good medical student, bad medical student, but that all of us, if there's something that we need to grow, that's good. It doesn't mean that we're bad. It means that there's something that we can do better.
Yeah, maybe let me just summarize a little bit.
Okay.
刚才胡教授呢就是说我们一般人呢有两种思维模式哈，一种就是 fixed mindset， 就是 fixed 思维哈，还有一种是 growth 思维。fixed 呢就是固定的模式，就是认为这个人是好的，或者就是这个人就是坏的哈，就是说像一个贴标签的不变的哈。那另外一个呢就是 growth mindset， 就是成长的思维，就是说这个人是会有变化的，会随着这个时间或者环境的不同，它会有改变啊。那通常就是说，如果是有这个 固定思维的话，你就很简单的就把这个人就认为是好人或者是坏人，或者是有一个例子就是说，胡教授刚刚举了一个例子，就是说如果是双胞胎哈，那这个父亲就会很容易就说，把一个人称为老大，另外一个人称为老二，那老大呢就会承受不一样的这个要求哈，但虽然他们都是同时出生的啊，那实际上就是每个人都是有不同的，也是会变化的，所以大概是这样子的一个区别。那还有一个，刚才胡教授也讲，就是说一个人的这个情绪哈，同时可能会有多个情绪存在啊。那yeah, maybe you can continue and I'll try to just step in and translate a little bit.
Okay. And then we can do it sort of a little bit at a time. So 老大有压力比较多，老二那老是觉得没有老大那么聪明，对，没有老大那么好。可是两边都是不开心。假设我妈妈说你是最漂亮的，还是你是最聪明的，也是对我不好。Can the transcript be in Chinese? That would be a good idea.
No, Zoom doesn't, it's not that good yet. So
okay.
Yeah, the transcript can only be English.
Okay, let's do the best we can, and then we'll also have some time in the question.
Yeah.
And then probably I'll be able to speak a little bit in English and a little bit in Chinese, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
我有的时候也会讲一点中文，我中文不是很标准，可是
讲得很好。
还可以，谢谢你太客气。Okay, so then we talked about emotions being complex, that you can have more than one emotion at a time, and this is very important. 所以怎么说，我们感动也是情绪，可以也是生气，也是我很爱我的妈妈，可是我有的时候也是对她比较不耐烦，不是就是一个东西。假设我的妈妈说你对她你说有什么问题呢？马上说那我是怎么说对她不感兴that's not true. We can have more than one emotion at a time. So another thing that I want to talk about is the whole idea of pain, suffering, 痛苦, being it exists, and ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Okay, so I got a quote somewhere that says, pain shared is lessened, joy shared is increased. I'm going to type that because I like that so much. Pain shared is lessened, joy shared is increased. 假设我有什么痛苦，我可以跟我的丈夫讲，我可以跟我的哥哥弟弟讲，那个压力，那个怎么说 burden
是压力
okay. 那压力少 somebody's sharing that with me. And then perhaps someone can translate in Chinese later for the recording. Dr. Hu explains very well in English. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can have the recording and we'll add the Chinese transcript. On
that sounds good.
With the video. Yeah.
Okay. So this is something that I think a lot of times when we are feeling under pressure, we feel like we might be weak or vulnerable if we share our suffering with others, if we share the pain, or we might be a burden on them. But really, because we as creatures, as mammals, as we are meant to be with others and to share with someone. Maybe it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but I think if we exist completely in isolation, it's very stressful. So we want to be able to share our pain and suffering with someone who understands us. And so that was getting back to the question about, what happens if I'm not getting spiritual, emotional support from my family members and they feel like they can't get it from me. That's very sad. That's something that we need to do something differently. We want to do it differently. So I'm still starting with concepts and then we'll get to strategies next. And so since pain exists, even if we don't express it, have you ever heard the English term, what you don't know can't hurt you? That's not true. So many things that you don't know can hurt you. And I think especially with pain, when we don't express it somehow, share it somehow, it hurts even more. Okay. Let me see if I can do this in English. OK， 我有的时候我带的链子，这个今天不是珍珠，因为我刚从医院回来。可是我找一找，等一下。我最喜欢的是这个，是珍珠。然后那个蚌壳里面，那个每个珍珠里面是有一个沙，一个尖尖的小石头。所以那个蚌壳要怎么说 protect itself，
蚌壳要保护它自己，
那慢慢变成这个珍珠。So at the center of every pearl is pain, and what the oyster does to protect itself is it recognizes the pain and then it creates something beautiful to protect itself. So actually, I'll take off the necklace that I'm wearing and then I'll put on the pearls because I like them so much. If the oyster did not recognize, 假设那个蚌壳没有看到这个沙，这个小尖尖的石頭 if the oyster didn't recognize the pain, it would just get more and more injured. The sand, the grit would burrow into the oyster and maybe eventually kill it. So when we recognize pain, that's actually a strength. We need to be able to recognize that. And as we talk about communication in the family, is something that we need to do about. And I see a question, pain shared lessened. If you shared often, the listener can be tired and they feel nothing to do about it. Yes, that's when we talk about strategies. What happens if you tell your spouse every day about pain? You tell a family member and then they don't want to hear it. Then that feels terrible. You feel ignored, you feel invisible, and that's a terrible feeling. And if that's also what's happening when somebody tells you about it, and there's a good question, if those you love don't want to share pain or joy with you, and that's also, so I'm still on concepts, and we'll talk about strategies soon. And then another concept that we're going to talk about is shared goals. So this comes up in the hospital a lot. If I say, I need you to take this medicine and then you'll get better. And then the patient says, you can't tell me what to do. Why would I want to do that? But if we have a shared goal and it's sort of like, you've been feeling very bad lately, and I think this medicine would help. You don't want to feel this bad, and I hope you feel better too. And then we talk about that. And we can talk about that in the family too. If it's like, I need you to take out the trash. I need you to do your homework. Take out the trash, do the homework. Then the person might resent me. But if it's sort of like, tomorrow is the trash day. Remember when we forgot, then the trash piled up and it smelled bad. Or for homework, especially for young children, helping them with the sort of like, you know how you felt so good in the class when you knew what was happening? If you were able to do the homework, then you can have that feeling again. So it's a shared goal. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, so I think we can start talking about some strategies, and then we can also answer questions. So strategies first, and then repair, because things don't always go well. And actually, some of the questions already have been about, you know, what happens when things go wrong, because things will go wrong. Every family will have things that go wrong, miscommunications, things that don't make sense. So the first strategy, even before we get to the strategies themselves, the strategy about strategies is do what works. If something is working, keep doing that. If something's not working, try something else. Okay. That's a basic strategy for work. That's a basic strategy for medicine. Americans say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And I think this is also something where if you find that a particular style of communication is working well with two of you, keep doing that. That's great. If you find that it's not working, then it's time to do something else. So even before we get to the individual strategies, we need to talk about that. Several strategies. One is compassionate listening. And I'll give you some examples that my husband gave me permission to share with you, because we're not perfect people, and sometimes the communication doesn't go well. So, okay, I came back from the hospital today a little bit after 7. The day before, or let's say last Friday, I came back at 8:30, and I say, I'm so tired. I was in the hospital for 12 hours, 12 Stunden. And I say, you know, I was there from 8:30 to 8:30. Okay, so here's some unhelpful things he could say. And in real life, he said almost all of these. Okay, so it's not he's a bad person. I love him. He's my husband. But sometimes he says things that aren't helpful. So one thing he might say, if I say, it's Friday, I spent 12 hours in the hospital. I'm so tired. What if he says, well, good thing tomorrow's Saturday. How do I feel? Do I feel like he's heard me? I don't feel like that. Thank you, Betty. Yeah, he doesn't, I don't feel like he's heard me. I don't feel like he's understanding my my suffering. And I feel like, so he thinks he's offering a solution, but I don't actually feel better. Okay, another one that's, I'll tell you in a moment what compassionate listening is, but then actually you can help me out, but I'll tell you some more things that compassionate listening is not. So I say, I've been working 12 hours at the hospital. And what if he says, well, if Stanford's so stressful, you should go work somewhere else. Is that, do I feel listened to? Do I feel heard? I feel even worse. It's like, what do you mean? Like, so that's actually not that helpful, even if he meant it to be helpful. What if he said, oh, and this I see all the time. He doesn't do this all the time, but I see this at the hospital. If I say, oh, I was there for 12 hours, and he say, wait, you got back at 8:30. So you weren't there, so you must have left the hospital at 8 o'clock, right? So it wasn't 12 hours, it was 11 and a half hours. Okay, so now, do I feel listened to? No, I feel terrible. I don't feel like he cares at all. And I've seen that in the emergency room. Somebody says, I've been waiting here for 6 hours, and then the doctor, the nurse says, no, really, you've only been here for 5.5 hours. Or they might say, it's not my fault. Don't complain to me. Okay, and these are doctors, these are professionals. So we're all susceptible to this. Here's a nice one. It says, Brene Brown in her book stated, when we are looking when we're looking for compassion, it's about connecting with the right person at the right time about the right issue. It's hard to find those kind of connections. What's your strategy to find those kind of connections? Yes, and the right person at the right time. I love that quote. The right person at the right time might have to be the people closest to you, the family. And so having these discussions, having these strategies will be helpful. So if you look up on YouTube, compassionate listening, and the movie is called Inside Out. I can put that in the chat. Sorry, I need to do it to everyone. Compassionate listening, and the movie is called Inside Out. One of the consultants for Inside Out was Paul Ekman from UCSF. So one of the faculty there from years ago. So, okay. So I told you what compassionate listening is not. If someone would like to unmute or put themselves in the chat, what would be something that I would feel better when I say, I've been working in the hospital for 12 hours. I'm so tired. You can give advice to my husband. Or you can give me
here's the soup. Here's the hot soup.
Here's hot soup. Okay, so that's something where he's helping take care of my body. You must be exhausted. I love that. So he's helping. That's a long time. Yes. So it's identifying that I'm not invisible, that I have feelings, and let me give you a massage. Yeah, please. You help. Come talk to my husband. There's one in Chinese I can't read. I'm sorry.
Work hard. Yeah. 辛苦了.
Yeah, you work so hard.
Uh-huh.
And I think and so these things where he's recognizing my feeling. The thing that I think and sometimes it's men more than women, or sometimes it just depends on how you're raised. A lot of times someone wants to have a solution. And so, when I have a problem with IT, and I was working from home, and my husband says, why don't you just call IT? Then he's offering a solution, or, tomorrow's Saturday, or any of those. That's not really a solution. So the things like, the hot soup, let me give you a massage. It's sort of like, I'm helping to care for you. And then it says, I feel lots of Chinese-born people, especially old generation, are not good listeners for compassion. It's not easy. It's not easy to find. That's very true, because I think, and because, my parents and my older family members, a lot of times they want to find the solution because it's hard, and they feel bad that they don't have the solution. But I would actually feel better if they just said, yeah, that's so hard. Another one, oh, I like this. Okay, let's go out for dinner today and have a great meal for you to relax. Oh, I love that. You deserve it. Hey, I'm going to tell that one to my husband. You deserve. Thank you for working so hard for us in family. You deserve it. So all of these are things where I would feel better. And so, okay, so now you've helped me with my family. Let's do my daughter's actually pretty good, but let's have a hypothetical young person, teenager. And this is something that we've done with some of our theater group, is someone says, oh, and then one more, you're such a dedicated person. Yeah, these are all things where I feel much better. I feel like I hear you. Oh, that's actually, that exact phrase is so good for so many things. Sometimes you don't have a solution. It's sort of like, my back hurts so much. 我的腰好痛. You say, I hear you. Right? You may not have a solution. You can't do surgery right then, right? But just for somebody to say, I hear you. My feet hurt. I hear you. Actually, for feet hurt, maybe they could give me a foot massage. But and then you should get rest. I'll do the housework. Okay, I want to take you all home and have you talk to my husband. I'll do the housework, make dinner, or go out for dinner. Yeah. So these are all things where I feel like I've been heard. My suffering is validated. So let's do a young person. And so this was something where a teenager came to us at Stanford and said, you know, help me, help my family. And actually, this one was the parent said, okay, tell me what I should do. My child said this morning, oh, I'm so stressed. So I asked the question, why are you stressed? And he said, I have a math test today and I didn't study for it. So I said, this is what the parent said, I said, you should have studied. And my child grabbed his backpack and went out the door without breakfast and slammed the door. Okay, so the advice you should have studied is actually good advice, but he wasn't able to do it. We can say he or she, it doesn't matter who the teenager is. He couldn't study right then, right? So the effect of you should have studied, even though it's good advice, the timing is not good. So the earlier question where it said, you know, or the earlier quote, the right person at the right time. In this case, maybe the parent is the right person, but it's not the right time to say you should have studied because he can't study now. So, and also now the child doesn't feel like the parent will be sympathetic, will be compassionate later on. So what are some of the things? Okay, I have some good ones. I went through the same thing. It was tough, but you will get through. Okay. Relax, just try your best. Okay, so that's something that's encouraging. One of the things that you might do is to ask a question. It's like, oh no. So there's more than one right answer, but one thing you can do is like, oh no, what happened? And then when we do this as a play, the next thing the teenager says is, you would know if you were paying attention. Okay, and then I'm like, oh, you know, I'm like, I feel wounded. But realizing that a lot of times when the person themselves is suffering, they are not completely mature. And so in this case, my first impulse as a mother might be, what do you mean I wasn't paying attention? I worked so hard for you, and how can you say I'm not paying attention? So instead I could say, you're right, I've been busy. I'm sorry, what did I miss? And then he says, I don't know. And it's like, is there something that I can help with now? And by the way, the whole time I'm doing this, I'm feeding the teenager breakfast, right? So at least they have some breakfast. So I'm like, here, have some egg. It has protein, And then they say, I don't, the teenager, and this is all based on my life. The teenager says, when I say, what would help? And they say, going back in time. Okay. So again, this is a little bit aggressive. It's a little bit immature, but that's okay. I'm the parent. I can, it's not like it's a competition to who's the most mature. So I say, going back in time is like, yeah, sometimes I wish I could go back in time too. So I realize that the teenager is stressed. I realize that the teenager, is telling me about something and is sharing it with me. So one of the questions of like, what if your family members don't want to share pain or joy with you? A lot of times they're afraid that you won't understand. And so I very much I went through the same thing. So if someone says, I forgot to study, it's like, oh yeah, I've done that. I've had times like that, and I was very stressed. And then I very much like the thing of like, relax, try your best, and then telling the teenager, it's like, I hope it's not as bad, but I can't wait to hear about it when you come back. Either way. If it's bad, I want to hear about it. If it's good, I want to hear about it. And that I think is one of the things where if if you can convey to each other that good, bad, happy, sad, you want to hear about it, you want to share it. And so that is being open to hearing things that are a little painful. Because first of all, if your growth mindset, hearing something that's painful is something that hearing something painful, you can't do anything about it if you don't know about it. So let me give another example. When we do the theater productions that are based on real things, one of the examples is when the child makes fun of the mom's accent. It's a video that we call Parents Are So Embarrassing. And this, of course, is based on real life. You know, people who are born here think it's so easy because it's like, wait, I speak perfectly, why don't you? And I think I didn't realize until I went to work in France. 我讲法文讲得还可以，可是 but I was exhausted at the end of the day after speaking French all day at work and at home. And only then did I realize that I took for granted what my parents had to work hard at. So I think there's things that I do that my child would take for granted. But I also think that if I'm defensive about it, then we're enemies, right? We have a shared goal. We would like to get along. So what might I say instead of, you know, you think you're so smart, you know, it's easy for you. You think you're better than me. Okay, that might be my first reaction. I'm not a bad person to feel wounded if a family member attacks me, makes fun of me. But what might be something that I could do? You can put in examples that are helpful or unhelpful. You can also give me ones that you've heard before, because that's also, so there doesn't have to be one right answer, or you can put in wrong answers too if you want. And of course you can unmute and say them if that's easier. So I could say, so for someone, if somebody makes fun of the mom's accent, they say, it's, I wish I could say, yeah, this is good. What you say is pretty true, but I'm trying my best. That's wonderful, because, you're human. And when the teenager says, you're saying it wrong and whatever, it's like, that's true, but I'm doing my best. And that there's two things that they learn. One is, of course, you're a person and you have feelings, but the other is that they will also learn that if there's something that they could do better or do differently, that they don't have to be defensive about it. So you're teaching them something about you, but you're also teaching them a way of being. So if somebody says, okay, so here's an example. I tried to make something and it didn't taste very good. Then say, my daughter said, Mom, don't try that again, because it didn't taste good. So my first reaction is, what, is like, and then, but there's things that I could be sort of like, I'm sorry, I wanted it to taste good, and you're right, it's too bland. And then I said, I was trying. And then my daughter said, well, thank you for trying. And it felt better than if it said, if you don't think it tastes good, you try it, right? Then we're enemies. But if it's sort of like, yeah, I was trying to make it taste better, I guess it didn't work as well. And then actually we got along better. Here's a good one. I was not born here. English is not my mother tongue. Understand, learning a language does take a long time. So here you're saying something that's true, and it's not defensive, and it not only gives you permission of like, I'm not perfect, but then also gives your child the permission of like, there will be things that you don't do perfectly and that take a long time, but they're still worth it. And it says, there's a question about, I've been going through therapists. I haven't found one I have connect with. Do you have recommendations? I'll talk a little bit about some things that might be available, but it won't be like an exclusive thing. When picking on parents' accent, it shows disrespect. In a lot of ways, yes. How to turn that into a teachable moment. And so this is a really, yes, and it's like, I bet they would speak Chinese with an accent too. Yes, and that's actually, when we do this as a theater piece, that's the first thing that the mom says in defense. It's so like, you know, you think my English is bad, you should hear your Chinese, right? 你讲中文讲得一塌糊涂，你怎么可以批评我的英文? But again, that makes us enemies. So I like the things where if it's sort of like, I can try to tell them to respect me, but it works better if I earn their respect. So if it's sort of like, yeah, I wish I could learn English better, but you know, I feel like it's worthwhile. The effort that I made is worthwhile if I, you know, if I brought you here, and maybe I'll never speak it perfectly, but it's still worth the effort. Okay. And then maybe they appreciate it. And then they say, you know what? I speak very good Chinese though. I mean, we can end up arguing. Yeah. I mean, so I'm sorry. So that's what the parent says. Like, you know, I speak English better. It's like, yeah, but I speak pretty good Chinese. And it's like, and I hope that you will learn languages that you know, that help you communicate and bring up new opportunities. So one of the things that the parent says when we do the theater is the parent says, you know, if your goal in life is to not have anyone make fun of you, you don't have to do anything. And then maybe nothing bad would happen to you, but nothing good would ever happen again. So if you tell the child is sort of like, I took the risk, I learned a language, I came here, and look at all the good things that happened after that. And I'm glad I did it, and I'm not going to stop trying. So to earn the respect in that way. Someone's bringing out, parents, we should have a sense of humor, very much. And this is also something that, you know, if it's defensive, then everybody's on, you know, on different sides, you're arguing. But if you have a sense of humor, you know, that's also good. And that's, I think, a lot of things that are painful, I can, if I can look on them in a sense of humor in the moment or even later, then I feel it's very healing for me. I'm realizing that the windows are all dark, so I'm going to just take a second and turn the light on. I will be right back. Is that a little better? That's a little better. Okay, I might have to turn on another light soon. Okay, so other things that we need to do in terms of listening is, what did I write in this? Work on what you can work on. There are some things that are not available to you, and if there's a problem and it's 30% this and 30% this and 40% this, maybe you can't get it all better, but maybe you can make it enough better so that things work, or work at least temporarily. So so a lot of, I like so much that people are bringing in these things. These are all possible things that you can say when a similar situation comes up, right? These are and these are things that you all came up with, and you can borrow each other's. Yeah, you don't have to just have your first impulse. Your first impulse is maybe that's the one that you'll go with, but you want to have other options too. So the so all of these, humor, showing them that you can listen for improvement. When my dad, who was a professor, had difficulty saying the word silver, and he wanted so much to talk about the Olympics and have a gold medal and silver medal and bronze, but it was hard to say. So he came to us as his children and we said first place, second place, third place, so that made it easier. And so it wasn't something that he was ashamed of. He wished he could say it more easily, but then we helped him with that. I've helped people with from other languages in French, in Italian. So if you come at it with a sense of humor and a sense of growth, then it might still hurt a little bit when somebody says that. But if you're sort of like, yeah, the actress Constance Wu, who was from Crazy Rich Asians and Fresh Off the Boat, she said, having an accent is nothing to be ashamed of. It means you speak two languages. So if anything, somebody with an accent is smarter than someone who just speaks one language. So, not being ashamed, that's already something. And then you can show your family members, your children, that there's something that you're not ashamed of, and that they shouldn't be ashamed if there's something that they can do differently or better and can continue to work on it. Okay, so we spent some time talking about the accents, and then one more thing that is, I think, especially true of the pandemic, or when things happen, when difficult things happen, when bad things happen, you can have different strategies, different reactions at different times. So someone named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I'll type this in the chat. I need to make it be everyone. And then she had a book called On Death and Dying, and it was talking about grief. And it was the first it was the first book of its kind on death and dying. It was very profound, and it talked about how when there's grief, you don't just have one reaction. There's typically many reactions at different times. And so she separated these into like anger or outcry, bargaining, what are all of them? Depression, acceptance, action. So I'm going to use a silly example because it's easier than when someone really is dying. It's so the first reaction of outcry, let's say my phone is out of battery. And so outcry and anger is like, oh no, my phone is out of battery. How could this happen? And then denial would be like, it's okay, it's fine. I need to turn it on. And then bargaining would be like, okay, if I could just, if I can just do like 2% power, I just need to send one email. And then depression is like, oh no, I'm dead. There's nothing I can do. And then acceptance is sort of like, okay, let me go find another, let me go see if I could borrow somebody else's. Yeah, I like also this thing where you can tell a family member or child, everyone has a right to be respected, to understand accent or not. We have a rights to be respected, yes. And then okay, some people were interested and some people quit. We still have close to 200, so we'll keep going. Someone living with severe mental illness challenges experience the living grief. Hard to explain. Yes, this is the reason I'm bringing it up. It was originally about death and dying, but it's also something that happens whenever there's bad news. So let's say that someone has a mental illness, let's say autism. And so the initial reaction of like denial, oh, you know, he's fine, or oh, bargaining would be sort of like, if we just find the right cure, we'll be okay. And anger, you know, I like a good thing here. The point is to be not to be confrontational. You want to make friends, not enemies. Exactly. You want to be on the same side of a situation. So in the pandemic, and when there's been the anti-Asian violence, and when there's been any bad thing that happens, different family members can be in different stages at the same time. So if we all wake up and we say, today we're all doing bargaining, today we're all going to just keep Googling things about autism, then it would be easier. But what typically happens is one person is busy Googling everything, or somebody else, you know, and so the person who's angry looks at the person who's bargaining and they don't understand, or the other way around. And I might say, oh, my husband doesn't love our child as much because he's in denial. And then he looks at me and says, oh, you know, why is this helpful that she's looking up everything about this illness? It's not helpful. We have other things we need to do. We have jobs, we have other children, right? So we have, and so if during the pandemic or during a tragedy, you realize that someone else maybe is just in a different stage of grief than you are, that's important. And then before we open up for questions and discussion, I want to talk about repair. So here we've talked about some concepts that we want to keep in mind, and we want to talk about some of the strategies. And we tried to all together come up with specific things we can say, but let's say it didn't work. A very important concept, I think, is that you can apologize for something that's not your fault. And I think in different languages, apologies have different things. I can say I'm sorry for something that's not my fault. So, you know, today, you know, there was a power outage. I'm sorry, that must have made it very hard. It doesn't mean I caused it, but the person who's hearing it knows that I feel bad about it, even though, you know, it wasn't my fault. And this is something that I think comes up a lot with cross-cultural communication, that one generation feels like the apology is a fault, and the other one just wants to hear that they heard about it. So another thing is that you can apologize for something that's not intentional. So if I open the door too fast and it hits somebody's face, even though I didn't see them there and I didn't do it on purpose, of course I should say I'm sorry. If I you know, dropped a book on somebody's foot, I'm still going to say I'm sorry. And I think this is also something that if I say I'm sorry, why did you put your foot there? I'm sorry, why were you standing behind the door? The other person doesn't feel like that's an apology. So if we start by saying, I'm sorry, are you okay? Are you hurt? It's a little bit like compassionate listening, but this is what you do when there's been a problem, when there's been something you have to repair. And then I think one more concept on repair, and then, oh, this is a very important concept. Let me type this in the chat. Do you know the term zero sum? If someone, I don't know if somebody can translate that. So zero sum means if I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. So it means if I give you $1, then I have $1 less. And I think that in the family unit gains by people understanding each other. So one of the things that you know, I had this discussion with my mom where, you know, she was like, you know, if I apologize, then your husband's, you know, I'm right, he's wrong. And I said, you know, right now you just want my husband to help you move the furniture. So if by saying, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but can you help move the furniture? He'll move the furniture. Otherwise, you're going to have to get, you're going to have to pay furniture movers. And it worked out okay. And actually afterwards, he felt better, she felt better. And in the heat of the moment, being able to apologize. So did someone put in Chinese zero sum?
零和 对
Okay, 零和是 zero sum.
Yeah. 是
This comes up at the hospital sometimes too. People will say, you know, if I said that the patient has a heart problem and he says the patient has a neurology problem, like if it turns out to be one thing and not the other, it doesn't mean that the other person's a bad person. Both were trying to find the right answer. So when you find the right answer for the patient, it's just good. Okay. If I find something first, it's a good thing. And that's we're all part of the same team. So I also try to praise people, either medical students or family members, for trying something even if it didn't work. So when we went on vacation and my daughter, you know, was a teenager and wanted to use like the Airbnb thing and found a place that wasn't very good, then, you know, I said, it's so brave of you to try this before mom and dad know how to do it. And you found a good location. It's too bad the host, the Airbnb host, didn't, you know, honestly say what the place was like. Let's go. Do you want to find another place on Airbnb and we'll go there? So I didn't punish her for something that wasn't her fault. I encouraged her for the effort and then didn't blame her for something where the Airbnb host wasn't completely honest. And so then she keeps, she feels okay keeping trying. So, you know, when she told me not to try something again, I was hurt, but once I said, you know, I did the best I could, and she was sort of like, yeah, you know, and then we talked about specific things to do differently, then we felt like we were on the same side. I wasn't trying to make something taste bad. I tried something and it wasn't that good, but when she encouraged me to try again, then I felt better. I realized we wanted to make sure to leave a lot of time for questions. I appreciate the ones that we've done so far, but also I want to open it up to some people who haven't had a chance to do that, and also to talk more about some of the ones that maybe I did only a little bit of. Oh, and then one more thing for people who have young people, offspring, teenagers, or young people. One recent finding from Stanford that I want to mention, because when I gave this talk at Apple, some of the parents, some of the mothers specifically, burst into tears. Teenagers go through a phase. First of all, their brain is not entirely myelinated. There's insulation in the brain that keep the wires from getting crossed. And early on, the reason they can learn languages so easily is because nothing's really, they're like a sponge. But then as they put in myelin, then things are more focused. It means there's less room for new things, but it also means you're able to be focused. So I'm going to say myelination. Teenagers, young people, their brains are not completely myelinated. So it means they're flexible, but it also means they're not that mature. It says, here's one about bullying. Oh, I spelled myelination wrong. Sorry, let me do that right. I'm not typing very well. Myelination. And I do want to talk about bullying. And I think that's a good one to talk about. So, but one thing about teenagers and young people is that they really do have some growing to do. Sometimes when they don't, maturity includes wisdom, but it also includes the brain being able to have paths. The young person's brain is like an open field with no paths. When they put down paths, it means that it's harder to create new ones, but it also means that the ones that are there work more efficiently. So one thing is that teenagers are probably not, being annoying on purpose. They're being annoying because they don't know how else to be. Most of the time, they're not really trying to just drive you crazy. But also, one of the recent findings by Vinod Menon at Stanford is that at some point, the child who has been listening to their mother goes through a phase of actually, the brain is actually paying less attention to the mother. And this is part of maturing, but it's also something where they relatively devalue what you're saying. They actually, it's almost like they're hard of hearing specifically for your voice. And so this is something that they found on brain scans, that the brain activation level was originally higher for your mother. The child listens more closely. And then a little bit later, they don't listen as closely. And it's not because you're a bad person, and it's not because they're a bad person, but as part of maturation and growth, as they become adults, they listen to you less. And it's not something that you've done or anything you deserve. So the specific question now, I wanted to talk about my 10-year-old grandson always said some students said they hate him and did not like to play with him. What do I have to answer? I don't live with them. So this is very painful. Bullying is very painful. I think the very first thing you do is to let your grandson know that that you're glad they told you about it, that you want to help and you want to, share with them. So before you do the problem solving, the first thing is sort of like, I'm so glad you told me. That must have been painful. That's very hard. And if you're there with them, give them a hug or whatever. And some of the things that we talked about in terms of being supportive is to start with recognizing his emotions. And then at that point, working with him, it's interesting because as a grandmother, you may be able to do things that he is afraid to tell his parents about. So it's sort of like, do you want me to talk with the parents? No. Do you want me to talk with the school? No. But then to say, what would help? And to try to, and you notice one of the first things, I didn't say, what did you do, right? But you can ask him is sort of like, do you feel like it's something that they're, do you feel like this is something, sometimes bullies make you feel that it's something that you did wrong. Is that something that you're wondering? And then kind of work with them. There's a whole separate talk we can do about bullying, but sort of to remind them that the bullies or people who are not playing with them, they're human too, which includes good and bad traits, and that they might be doing it for things that have nothing to do with your grandson. They might be doing it because they feel picked on at home, or because they're angry about something, and so they're taking it out on them. And that's not right and that's not fair, but it also doesn't have anything to do with your grandson. And if it turns out that it's something that's like racial, if it turns out that it's something like that, then you can say, you know, I've experienced something like that. You can let them know it's not right, it's not okay. And you can also let them know that there's more than one thing and that you don't necessarily have to do something about it right now. It might be something where you sort of figure it out, and let your grandson know that you're with him no matter what, and that however long it takes to get through it, you'll get through it together. Yeah, and then, oh, I'm behind on my questions, sorry. I need to go up. If a friend keeps complaining about her procrastination to me for a long time, but shows no sign of wanting to make any changes, what should I do? Just the compassionate listening only? So start with the compassionate listening. That's always a good place to start. And then at some point you might say, why do you think it's hard to change? And so have her do some of the trying to find a solution. Sometimes it's something that your friend maybe not for procrastination. Some things they will probably need to get professional help. But in this case, it's sort of like, you know, it's hard. And it might be that your friend is procrastinating because she's perfectionist and delays doing it because she doesn't know how to do it. She wants to do it perfectly. And if she puts it off, then she has an excuse for not doing it perfectly. So if you're not her therapist, you might not have an answer. But if you're just her friend, and say, what do you think? And this can be, I think as a friend, you might be able to have some more distance from it. If it's a family member, it can be very frustrating. Oh, good. Okay. Somebody already answered the question. I would probably ask her, do you mind sharing an action plan to change this behavior? Yeah. So it's sort of like, I hear that this is causing you a lot of distress and suffering. What do you think are things that might help? And if the friend says, you always do things well, let me ask what you do, then you can do that. If I go straight to the thing, it's like, why don't you put it in your phone? Why don't you, you know, do this? Or you can sort of work on different strategies, that it might be more than one strategy. Here's a good one. I would tell her if she really wants to stop her procrastination bad enough, she will stop procrastinating or find ways to overcome. Otherwise, we just need to listen. Okay, so listening, I think, is still, you know, if you start by listening, sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's not. But working with her and saying, you know, what are things that help. The next question is, how do I handle a child that thinks her Asian mom is overprotective? Yes, very much. This we could almost do the whole talk on this. You know, if we grew up in a different setting, and our children's parents can assume things that we don't feel like we can assume, that's not just you making it up. You mean well, and I think to start by letting your child know, you know, I mean well. And if they say, oh, you know, my friend's parents let them drink alcohol. My friend's parents let them go out at night or things like that. And they say, it could be that they feel like things are going to be okay. I grew up differently. I couldn't assume that things were going to be okay. This is actually a discussion that I have very often, you know, where it's sort of like, when I grew up, things weren't always going to be okay. And so I don't want bad things to happen to you. And then sort of work with them. So if it feels like your enemies, you're overprotective, no, you're stupid, then that feels bad. But sort of like, maybe I am being overprotective. I don't want bad things to happen to you. But if I'm different than the other moms, maybe it's because we had different experiences, and my life experience included that sometimes things didn't always turn out well. And then here's the question. Sorry to ask again. Is spouse talking or email very mean to you? How do you handle it? How to stop it? Okay, good. I'm glad you brought this up again, because this was one of the first questions. So one of the classes was sort of using this example of the spouse said, look at what you did to the microwave. How can you be so stupid? And then the person was like, felt terrible. So let's help. So telling the spouse is like, I did my best, and when you talk to me that way, I'm so hurt. I can't even, I was trying to make something in the microwave. I wasn't trying to mess up the microwave, or I wasn't trying to, I wasn't trying to do it wrong. So that's one thing where it's sort of like letting them know you're a person, and actually that you're on the same side. It says, my education method was inappropriate. My 15-year-old daughter hates me. Her door is completely closed to me. We haven't spoken for 5 years. I'm so sorry. Is it possible for her to forgive me in the future? I think this is such a good question and very moving. And I thank you for not giving up. And so to be able to say, I grew up in a way that's very different, and it's probably been hard for me to understand you and hard for you to understand me sometimes. I do want to try because I'm your mother and I love you, and I hope we can open the door a little bit. So in this way that I'm talking to this 15-year-old, some of it is not saying that we're enemies, that I would like to communicate better. I think on some level she wants to communicate better. She's afraid of being hurt. And if there's been some times in the past that you hurt each other, miscommunicated, the parent will probably have to be the first one to apologize, because that's what we do when we're parents. Or, whoever's actually, sometimes I have to apologize to my mom. So maybe it doesn't have to be, but it's not a zero-sum game. So whoever apologizes first didn't lose. Whoever apologizes first maybe wins, because you help the situation be better. There's a funny one here. Complaining seems to be a national pastime in Chinese culture. Not just Chinese culture. I think I tell people I can't complain, but sometimes I still do. And it's okay to complain, because it's also, when you share something, whether it's about yourself or about the other person, maybe it's at least partly the faith that you'll keep trying to get better. And actually, when someone's told me that I've done something wrong, even though my first reaction is to be defensive, I try very hard to say, thank you for bringing that to my attention. And you'd be amazed how much that works. When I did work in France, I remember somebody trying to remind me, said, Americans find the French very critical. But remember, if they're criticizing you, they still, if they give up on you, then they don't even tell you to dress better or speak French better or whatever. So if they're criticizing you, they feel like you're worth the effort. So that was something that I tried to keep in mind even when it hurt. Sorry, there's a few. When I start talking, then I miss some of these. What's the strategy to handle your spouse constantly complaining about small mistake for house chores? That's a good one, because I think that comes up very often. And if people want to help me with some of these, one is to say, I did try. Is there something that you feel like, is like, I didn't do it on purpose? Things like that. So to try not to get defensive, but to also say, why is this so important to you? I say, okay, I want, so I don't know if I have time for this, but I very much wanted my husband to put the measuring spoons back into the drawer when they're clean. He said, I just use this for something dry. I dusted it off and I put it back in the drawer. But then I said, okay, but I don't know what was there. So if it's brown, maybe it's coffee. If it's tan, maybe it's oatmeal. But, I think we'll get ants if you put the dirty thing back in the drawer. When I said, don't put dirty things, don't put dirty socks in the drawer, don't put dirty t-shirts in the drawer, don't put dirty things, then he got very defensive. But if it's sort of like something where we both have it in common, it's like, I don't want there to be ants. If you can wash and one of the solutions we had was to have more than one set of measuring cups, so that if one was still drying, then we would still have another one. It seems not easy to be a compassionate listener. Is there any training in this field? It's a good question. I wish I had the answer for you. You might have to look that up. I have to admit that I've done this sort of like training by doing. So I think a lot of it, as I've been, at the beginning of the pandemic, when a lot of the therapists were helping the frontline workers, they all had to have some very quick training on compassionate listening. Because what happened with the frontline workers was people would say, sort of like, I'm so afraid that I'll get COVID and bring it home to my family. And if the therapist said, oh, you probably won't, then the frontline workers in the hospital felt terrible, and they didn't feel listened to. So instead, starting with, it is very frightening, and sort of like, and then asking, how are you coping with that? And then working on that together. There's also a thing saying, if Dr. Who's method does not seem to help, consider your spouse might need therapy. There are many reasons. That's true. Some of these, all of these are things that might be helpful in certain situations, but are not helpful in all situations. So there are definitely times when a spouse is mean and will respond to feedback, and other times when maybe they will continue to be mean. And if that's the case, there may be something more. But I think I think that's important. Here's a very good one. Seems like to apologize in Chinese is harder than in English. I think that's true. And I've noticed I've taken French and Italian and a little bit of Spanish, and now I'm learning some Portuguese. There are different ways of saying I'm sorry. And some of them, in French, it's sort of like, I beg your forgiveness. And that just sounds very weird. I don't want to beg anybody for anything. I do think it's harder in some languages than others. Excuse me. What do you do when you have someone in the family thinks he's always right and never makes any mistakes? Boy, that's annoying. That's very annoying. And I think that's something where, in the moment you might have difficulty saying, it just might be so angrifying, but that later on it's sort of like, I sometimes feel like everything I do is wrong and everything you do is right, and that I feel bad about that. What do you think would make a difference, and sort of help them do the solution? And if their solution is, well, you should just be another person, you should be better at everything, then it's sort of like, that doesn't sound very realistic. And then I think we're getting close to the time, so let me just see if I'm what happens after sincere apologies? Kids are still not coming back. There's estrangement among lots of families. How should parents do? I think that's also very true. If there's estrangement, and this is easier said than done, but I would say don't give up. Do an apology, try another way, wait, try again. Paraphrasing, I think, is good, where someone can say, if somebody says, you're right, or you're wrong, and so forth. trying to paraphrase and said, I hear what you said about the microwave, and I admit it didn't work out right, but I want you to know that I tried and that I didn't do it wrong on purpose. And then family counseling therapy, yes, always. That's a good thing to consider. Maybe try to set a drawer or tray just for dirty or use stuff with the husband. Thank you. That's actually one thing that I said, you know, so like if you need this measuring cup for this, and then you're going to need it later, then have a spoon rest. They actually have, that's like an actual object. Very good talk, but I have a prior commitment now. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Hu, Mr. Yin, and Betty for organizing this Zoom. Thank you, of course, and thank you for coming. What will be your thought about making something different? What is your expectation? That's a good one too. That's a good, when there's someone who's like always right, and sort of like, what would you propose? What are some things? And so to be like honestly curious instead of defensive. So actually, I wish I could go back in time and go back when my daughter said, don't try this again. It's like, okay, what about it would you want to do differently? And actually, I would learn something different that might be helpful, but also she would learn that she can make mistakes and recover from them and be resilient. And that might be even more important than the dish itself. And then recommendations for good therapists. For therapists, I'm a psychiatrist, so I also prescribe medications. For therapists, you can look on psychology.com. They have a website. At Stanford, we have a I call it SMART Clinic, Stanford Mental Health for Asians Research and Treatment. And we have psychiatrists and psychologists. We do have a wait list, but we're working on getting more of that. So I'll say SMART Clinic, Stanford Mental Health for Asians Research and Treatment. Tell me if you like the acronym. There's we wanted to make it so that it's not stigmatizing, so that it's something where, you know, we can always all work on things. It's not a bad thing. And then I might be out of time, but therapy with personality disorder. So there's illnesses where people were doing fine, and then later on they developed depression, like they weren't always depressed, or they didn't always have schizophrenia. Personality disorders are things where lifelong, they always tend to see things a particular way. Maybe they've been maybe they tend to have a bad temper, and they had a bad temper as a child and then as an adult. And these are things that actually require a lot of therapy, and that does require some time, and also the person being willing. Okay, maybe I'll do this as the last question and then we'll wrap up, because I don't want to miss anything, but I also know people have other things they have to go to. Mm-hmm. My husband and I have been married for 22 years. I'm 53 years old. My husband is 60 years old. We have had a fight for 22 years, but we're old and don't want to get divorced. My husband is an avoidant personality. Yes, okay, this is a personality type, and it's hard for him to change, and has low self-worth, doesn't communicate with people. I'm in pain. What should I do the rest of my life? This is probably something that will take marital counseling, because this is something that, in this case, the spouse, the wife is hearing something, or no matter what, you know, you tell the husband and he's avoidant. Avoidant means if you say, I'm in pain, and the husband says, I'm busy, you know, that's a lot of suffering. That will probably, I think that situation that you're mentioning, what should I do for the rest of my life? Just being in the same situation, I think, sounds very painful, maybe intolerable. So at this point, if your husband will go with you to marital counseling, that would be wonderful. If he won't, then if you go to therapy yourself to sort of figure out, do I want to tolerate this or not? Is a divorce worth it or not worth it? But I think the first step is to realize you are suffering. And then last question here. What are the causes of personality disorder? It's often, there's some genetic, there's often people who are more introverted, just, you know, they're born more introverted. And that's not a personality disorder, but the avoidant people might be a combination of social anxiety. You know, when they do animal studies, the anxious mothers will often have anxious offspring, and but then there's also, of course, a large role of environment, not just genetics. That the that if scary things have happened, if someone who has been bullied or has had bad things happen to them, then they're very likely to develop social anxiety, and it's not their fault. In either case, it's not something they chose. That's a very important thing when we talk about any mental illness or mental condition or personality disorder. People with personality disorders, even if they have a bad temper, they don't wake up saying, I want to have a bad temper today. I'm waiting to explode. They usually find it very difficult and very painful for them too. They might not realize that it's because of them. They might say, oh, everybody else should be better to me. But on some level, it's painful as well. And then thank you. Thank you for the very helpful talk. Thank you. And thank the organization. Yes, thank you so much. And then someone asking about anger management. There's actually specific things, and I think it's wonderful to already recognize I do have anger management problems. I wish I would like to do something about it. That's brave. That's brave. It's courageous. So I commend that person for being able to say, I would like to do that better. And then I guess I'll close out so that our hosts can say a little bit. The last comment here is, thank you so much, Dr. Hu. So glad to get the chance to learn from you.